This is lab 19, and this is associated, of course, with lecture 19. And our topic of this is let's say, just say decision trees, both classification and regression trees. Okay, so let's grab some data. So we can, of course, load the ISLR package, and we can get our car seats data set. That's of course a nice. I don't know why I'm getting an error here. It's a nice little data set. ISLR. Let's try installing that. Oh boy. Of course it wants to not be nice. Install the ISLR package, which apparently was not already installed here. Okay, there we go. Loaded up. There we go. Okay, we have a car seats data set, right? So, contains information about sales of car seats based on various covariates about how they're sold, etc. And we can build a regression tree. Say, if we want to predict sales price, we could build a regression tree using the package rpart, which is a package that gives us a function also called rpart, which is recursive partitioning and regression trees. And I believe it also does classification trees. And here, you can read through about the parameters. We can look at them in practice here. So maybe we want to split our data. Let's set our seed to be something, and let's say the training data set is going to be, well, let's get our subset. Let's sample, get our training subset. Let's call that SS train, and there we go. Okay, those are our training subsets, and we want to build our training set. So let's just grab those rows as our training and our test, or maybe we'll call it validation. Will be everything else. Cool. And we can build our model. We can build our regression tree model by calling rpart. And you can give the formula just like you'd give a regression, the LM function. So I want to predict sales. Maybe I want to predict it from everything else. So that's my formula. I'll give it my training data as my data. And here in method, if we go up to method here, ANOVA, Poisson, blah, 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 class, which would be classification, presumably. But ANOVA is what we'll specify for regression. So it's a little bit of a quirky thing, but that's basically what they call the regression tree. And the package is a little more general why, but call ANOVA, that will use RSS for the regression tree. There are some other parameters we can pass this. This is a so-called control parameter, and it takes an rpart.control object, but we can specify other things about how we're going to fit this tree. For instance, I can have a max depth of how many nodes deep I want in my tree. I can have a min split of minimum number of points to be in a split, to be in a basically rectangle after I do a split. And I can actually specify xval, which is the number of cross-validation. I don't want to use the word split here, folds that I create. So here I'm going to do 10-fold cross-validation. I fit my model, and it's really, really, really quite fast to fit. And so what can I do with this? I could, of course, plot my model. And if I plot my model, it gives me this, this tree, which is my tree, although it's not particularly useful because I don't know what any of these splits have to correspond to. But here is the regression tree. I can add on some text onto it by adding text. And here we go. Here, although it's a little bit messy, but not too bad, actually shows me what my tree is. So the first, it splits on shelf location. That's going to split on price. You know, if I go down to right here, I'll split on price, then on advertising, right? So I believe that it says price bigger than 109.5. So if that's true, it goes to the right. If it's false, it goes to the left. Advertising less than 13.5, you know, etc. Right? So it's telling you all the variables it's splitting on and where it's splitting them. So that's a really, really nice part about trees, is to have this gorgeous visualization. And you can take this visualization. Everyone understands a decision tree. It's just just go through the nodes and decide at each covariate whether or not, well, what bin it falls into. And that's the model, which is nice. We can do our cross complexity tuning. So let's just see cost complexity. So if I get model slash, and I look at the CP table. So CP is what I was calling C alpha before. And this is going to give me, this is what I was calling C sub alpha. This is the number of splits. And here I have basically a cross-validated error. So the second column here is my cross-validated error. So if I were to choose my, actually, I'm sorry, CP is here is my alpha. If I were to choose my alpha according to these values. So you see, if I have a very small alpha, I get a large tree, right? So I have a number of splits here. The second column, I have a large number of splits. As I increase alpha, I'm going to decrease the number of splits. So I get a smaller and smaller and smaller tree until I have no splits, which we have in this little stump. And you can see that, as I said, is that you have this nested sequence of trees of fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer splits as I increase alpha. And so basically, the way it chooses alpha is that, you know, it's going to choose the sequence of alphas to get me this nested sequence of optimal trees for each of those alphas, which is this nested sequence. And you can kind of see if I, you know, if it's calculating cross-validated error, if I chose my alpha here and I would get this many splits, and here would be kind of cross-validated error. So it's really, really quite nice. There's some other information in there too, but I could plot, say, why don't we name this table? Let's say CT. That's my table name, and I could plot, say, CT. I can grab the alpha, so that's basically alpha is what it's calling CP, and I could also grab off maybe I want my cross-validated error, X error, and I can plot those against each other. Probably what I want to do is I want to plot this alpha on a log scale so we can spread things out. But here is basically what I'm going to get. Here's my value of kind of log of alpha on my x-axis against a cross-validated error. And so you can actually see that there is some point here where you get some minimum, and this presumably we would choose our alpha to minimize this kind of cross-validated error. So I could say maybe opt alpha is, so let's just say, so I can find which row has my minimized cross-validated error. This says row 10, so that should correspond to about here, which is actually 9 splits. This would be my value of alpha, and that seems to be this 0.597, seems to be the lowest. You can see it's like 0.62, it gets down to 0.95, and then it starts increasing again. So it looks to be about 9 splits, or this value of alpha is going to be my optimal. So I could say my optimum alpha. Let's grab off that from my table. So this is just my optimum alpha, which is about 0.14, right? Which is what it says here. So the nice thing about this is it has a built-in kind of cross-validation, just like kind of a GLM or our lasso and our ridge regression methods. Those had a built-in cross-validation. They didn't actually need to do hard work. It's really built in. Super, super, super nice. So I could, for example, if I copy off this plotting code here, let's just say, obviously what we want to choose is, let's say, we could put a vertical line at our optimal value of alpha. Or I guess in this case we had plotted in a log scale, so it should be log of that. So it looks like this value here is basically that minimizes, it's the one that minimizes things. You can actually prune the model. You can choose the model with the optimum value of alpha. So I have to say prune is my pruned model, and then I can call a function called prune. I give it my model. I give it my alpha value, which they call CP, doesn't really matter. And I give it my optimum alpha value, and it'll create a model. If you print out these models, it does tell you everything in text about how they're built. That's a bit hard to read. But I could plot this pruned model, and you can see that it is a bit smaller than my original model. If I scroll back up to my original model, it's much more complicated. But the complications probably is overfitting there. So what I've done is I've pruned back. I've kind of gotten rid of things to make cost complexity pruning, and hopefully I'll get a better model here. So if I want to predict, I can predict, let's say my model, and I want to predict it on what? I had this validation set, right? Ooh, that maybe didn't work. What did they call my validation set? Yeah, I did call it validation. Not sure why that's not printing anything. That's weird. Well, if it worked correctly, you should be able to. Oh, for some reason, this validation set has no data in it. Well, that's strange. Oh, maybe I need to redo this somehow here. Let's see what's going on. Oh, I have put everything in my training set. So this really needs to be, let's go like this. Let's do a 50-50 split. Sorry about that. We can rerun our data. If I can type correctly. Okay. Okay, so now, okay, so my whole data set has 400. I can take 200 and put it into my training data set. Cool, cool. So that's my training, and then my validation data set should be everything else. So it should work now. Run that, okay. Training validation, let's just do a gut check. What's the dimension of my training? What's the dimension of my validation? Should be both 200. Let's just refit these. And we might get a slightly different answer when we do this. It looks pretty similar, right? Oh, now it's even more obvious. Well, it is what it is. Pretty similar answer, which is good. Pretty similar. What was my optimum? So this said the optimum is about 0.17. Let's see where that ended up here. 0.17. Oh, again, at about, I think it was 9 splits before, 10 splits now. So similar deal. That's about the minimum. So didn't change that much, which is really nice. It's concerning that we're doing something reasonable. Now we're pruning back our tree. Here's our prune tree. It looks pretty similar. Now our validation data set actually has stuff in it. Don't screw that up. We can now actually predict. So let's, on our original model, we can predict on our validation. and we could calculate the RSS for the training, which would be what? Take that. Well, let's do this in two ways. First, let's do it for a training data set. So for our full model, or unpruned model, so this is our unpruned model, predict on the training data set, and then let's take our predictions, and we'll subtract off the truth. What were we predicting? We're predicting sales. Is that right? Where did we build our model? We're predicting sales from everything else. So we calculate RSS, subtract off the true sales. Of course, we want this sum squared. Okay, so that's the full model. We can calculate this, of course, for the pruned model. So I can replace my model here with the pruned one. So obviously, on the training data, the full model has a lower RSS because it's a more complicated model. The pruned one is the full model is somewhat nested within the pruned one. And this is, so this is be like adding on covariates to regression. Of course, you're going to get a lower training RSS, but we don't care about training RSS, do we? Right? Well, we care about testing. And now here's the danger, right? Or maybe call this validation. I haven't tested this before, so hopefully we're going to get a better answer. But no guarantees. So we're going to do this on our validation data, and hopefully is that on independent data, we're actually going to get a better. Yep, on our pruned model actually has a. Oh no. Oh yeah. Yep, it does. Whew, worked out. On our pruned data, we actually do get a lower RSS here. These are both quite high. You can look at other metrics if you wanted. Maybe median is more. Well, median goes the other way, but it's you could look at other metrics. So obviously for the training data, you're guaranteed that the full model will have a smaller RSS. And hopefully, if we do this well for the validation data, the pruned data will have a better model if we do a pruning correctly. It's a bit complicated because there are a lot of parameters to play around with, but that's the kind of hope. So that's a kind of a real quick overview of trees. We can look at a classification tree in about 30 seconds here. We'll hit it more next time. Maybe we'll pull up our iris data. All right, so that's our iris data set. We can fit a classification tree instead of a regression tree using pretty much the same thing. And I'm just going to be lazy. I'm just going to fit on everything. So we're going to fit, maybe we want to predict the species from everything else. And to do this, I believe we just hit, it's not part, but our part. Oops, I need to give my data. This will fit a classification tree. So I've changed my method to class. You can play around with our other arguments too, but everything I said there and all those things we did there, we can do, for example, for classification. I've just changed my method from ANOVA, which is what we use for regression, to class for classification. And you can see that the purity of these nodes here, maybe I'll just end by saying, that's my classification model. We can plot this. Really, really simple tree. Probably suspiciously simple, but it works really well. And see how interpretable that is. Probably we want to play with the parameters here a bit more. But basically says if I look at petal length and petal width, I could distinguish between my flowers. So we'll stop there for today. Trees.